Have you ever noticed every few years you hear the name El Nino everywhere in the news? Well, El Nino means boy in Spanish. But what is this phenomenon that they keep talking about? Just like we said, El Nino or El Niño means boy in Spanish, but it has nothing to do with boys or Spain. Alongside El Nino, you might have heard about La Niña. This means girl in Spanish, but also this has nothing to do with a girl. So the name of the boy and the girl has entered the language for this weather phenomena. But between the two, El Nino is much more well known. When the water of the Pacific Ocean in the equator gets cold, they call that La Niña. But when the weather in the equator gets warmer, that's called El Nino. These two affect the entire world, but the biggest effect takes place in the Pacific Ocean around the equator. When you look at the globe and you see the Pacific Ocean, it pretty much takes up half of the planet, so it's much bigger than people think. So any weather changes in a body of water that's this large could affect the entire planet. The biggest place it affects is North America. Even the Atlantic hurricanes that take place once a year affect North America and the Caribbean Sea. But let's see how the El Nino takes place in the Pacific Ocean. It has been 50 years since experts have been examining the weather around the world, something that was not here before. So having 50 years of data about weather is very helpful in understanding El Nino and La Niña. Like right now when we're recording this video, experts are examining the weather and they're realizing that the temperature of the Pacific Ocean in the equator is rising slowly. And this is the first indicator that there is an El Nino coming. The statistic shows that when the Pacific Ocean waters start to rise in temperature like this, the rising temperature continues to go up until spring of that year. So this time it's going to continue rising until March 2024. This rise in temperature mostly affects North America, and it changes up the entire continent. Like in the northern eastern side, it gets much colder because they get the northern stream. In the middle, around Washington to Chicago, it gets warmer. And California all the way to Texas and all of Mexico gets a lot wetter. And while it gets wetter, it becomes more rainy, and it also becomes a little bit more cold. South of the US is usually very hot, but when El Nino happens, it gets colder and rainier. You might ask, does El Nino only affect North America? No, it affects the entire world, but it affects North America the most. When you have a body of water that extends to the half of the planet, it's for sure gonna affect the entire ecosystem of the planet. The difference between North America and the other places is that it directly affects it, but the other places that it affects, it's indirectly, and there's a chain reaction because of it. But let's continue. In the Pacific Ocean, there's usually a wind, and its direction is obvious. It goes from east to west. When this wind blows, it causes the warm air in the Pacific Ocean to continue going west, so it goes towards Australia and New Guinea. So when you look at the map, you see most of the warm water in the Pacific Ocean piling up on the west side. So when warm water goes towards the west, it has to be replaced with something. So water from beneath the ocean comes up, which is much colder, and cools down that entire area, so the temperature difference is huge. The situation we're explaining to you, where warm water goes towards Australia and cold water gets replaced, is a normal thing, and it's usually like this. Like on the west side of the Pacific Ocean, there is a lot warmer climate, so it rains more. But on the eastern side in South America, even though it's on the equator, the weather is cooler because of this super cold water. So these are normal temperatures in the Pacific Ocean, but sometimes they get messed with, and the wind does not properly blow. Every few years, that wind stops to work, and this wind is the engine of the weather in this area. And when the engine stops working, the warm water, instead of being on the west side, comes in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. So damn near everywhere is warmer. So all the way from Australia to South America, the Pacific Ocean water is going to be much warmer. The thing that changes the most is that it negatively affects most places in the world. Like for example, Southeast Asia and Northern Australia is much more prone to raining. But when this takes place, there's a drought and it's much more dry. And the rainfall that was supposed to happen there is happening in the middle of the Pacific Ocean where there's clouds forming. This is the El Nino. But just like we said, it mostly affects North America. On the other side of the Pacific, like around Peru, when El Nino happens, there's floods everywhere. While in normal times, it does not flood in this country. But east of Brazil all the way to India is going to be much more dry, so there's a chance of drought. So this is how El Nino affects the world. Some places it's much more severe and some places is not that significant. Like in the Middle East, where you really can't tell a difference even though it has an effect on it. Another important thing is that when El Nino happens, the entire temperature of the planet rises by a few degrees. So the world gets a little bit hotter. This has been shown. When scientists take a look at the data, every year that we had a super hot year, it was most likely a year that El Nino happened. And vice versa, every year that was El Nino, it was extremely hot compared to the years before and after. Either way, El Nino ends in a few months, and most of the times it goes back to normal. But there's another thing that could take place, and that's La Niña. In normal times, the hot water is supposed to go towards Australia and stay around that area. But when La Niña is taking place, the hot water does not return to normal, where it stays towards the west side. The wind that blows from the east to the west gets so much stronger that the warm water that's supposed to stay on the west side gets pushed past Australia, Indonesia, and pretty much enters Southeast Asia. And the entirety of the Pacific Ocean and the equator has cold water now. When La Niña happens, it raises rainfall drastically in Southeast Asia all the way to India and even Central Africa and South America. But it's not like it's a good thing, because it causes more droughts than ever. Like in the Middle East, it's going to be much more dry and less rainfall. But the drought does not remain only in the Middle East. It happens in northern Mexico, Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, Nevada, and California. So in this video, we learned what girl and boy means in Spanish, and when you use these names in weather, what they mean. When you look at the map of the world, you see the Pacific Ocean, and you see that a lot less people live around the Pacific and the Atlantic and the Indian Ocean. But it's still half of the world and puts a huge effect on the planet. Please let us know if you have any ideas you would like to share.